name is Svetlana. I'm a member of the Coos Beekeepers, and it is my honor to introduce our speaker. Today, Carolyn Breece is a senior faculty research assistant at the Oregon State University in the honeybee lab, led by Dr. Ramesh Sagiri. And Ellen has been in this role since 2009. She manages the 60 hives in the research apiary at the Oregon State University. She also has her own small apiary. And her specialty is research, especially that concerns honeybee health and diseases. So the topic of her presentation today is on hive health and diseases that causes die-outs and collapses of colonies. So I met Carolyn at the Oregon State Beekeepers Association annual conference in Florence this past October. And another beekeeper recommended that I invite her to give a talk, and she graciously agreed. So we're really honored to have her here and share her expertise with us. She also suggested that after her presentation, we could examine some diseased frames so that we could have hands-on experience looking at the frames to see what different kinds of diseases look like in the hive. Foul brood or chalk brood or whatever may be killing the bees. She also invited another senior faculty research assistant, Alan Poppitzhofer, from the honeybee lab as well, to come and accompany her and help with the frame inspection after her presentation. Alan has been in beekeeping research for many years, over a decade now, and her specialty is overwintering queen banks. So she helps with research on how to keep multiple queens in a hive over winter. Everybody knows that it's difficult to find queens in the winter, or late fall, or in the spring. And so to address this need, they're doing research on how to overwinter a whole bunch of queens in a single hive. So I had the privilege to see her give a talk at the Oregon State Beekeepers Association last fall. It was a really great presentation, really interesting topic of great relevance to every beekeeper in the state. So with that, Carolyn, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys for having us out here. It's really nice to get out of town. And I hear this is the banana belt of Oregon. And so we haven't seen the sun probably, it feels like 6-7 weeks. And so we saw the sun today, and it was really exciting. And that sunset tonight was incredible. So we're flying high. Have you guys seen this? No? Okay, this is the brand new Oregon pollinator license plate. Excuse me. It has been approved through the DMV, but we need to get, I think it's like 3,000 people on board. So you have to buy a voucher, and then they'll print them. So there's some steps. So I guess they need proof that this is going to take off. So if you're interested, it's, I think it's $40, and there's a website that I can send to you maybe after can you send it to the group? Yeah. Okay. You go online and you get your voucher, and then once they reach that goal and they start printing, you submit your voucher, and then you get your license plate. And you can customize it if you want, or you can get the number that you're issued. But the great thing is the proceeds go to research. So they go to our jobs, and they just go to the general research fund. So it's really exciting. This is, it's such an easy fundraiser, and it's beautiful. Bumblebees, so this goes to the honeybee lab and the pollinator health lab, so the native bees. There's bumblebees, a honeybee, there's a little tiny bee right there. So, and it's on clover, which is a really important crop that's grown mostly in Northwest Oregon, and it's just like crimson clover. If you have ever seen a field of it, it's the most beautiful thing. So you could have this on your car. Right. So today I'm going to talk about honeybee diseases. This is my favorite topic. I love talking about diseases. It's just there's always something interesting to learn. I love going through the mucky, gooey frames and trying to figure out what happens. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about all the different clues that you can gain when you're looking closely at a hive. But it's also January. It's a time for reflection and a time for planning ahead. So 2023, this year, I want you guys to commit to making this your best year in beekeeping. So whether you are just starting out this year or you have decades of experience, let's make 2023 our very best year. So who's just starting out this year? Hey, okay, welcome. And then who's been here for 5 years? Okay, great. And then anyone over 5 years? Okay, awesome. You know, I've been here a few times, but I feel like it's been over 5 years. I don't know if any of you have been to one of my talks here before, but this is such a great place. Thank you. It's great to be back here. Anyway, so let's make 2023 your best year. And what we're going to do to make it your best year is we're just going to go in detail and be really, really vigilant about your colonies and really slow, methodical, and really pay attention. It's easy to kind of go through your jobs that you need to do and be done, but this year, we're going to really dive deep and look at what we have. So let's provide a healthy environment for our bees. We're going to sharpen those observational skills and look for anything that's wrong and immediately take action. Be hyper vigilant about varroa, because we know that is the #1 reason a colony will die or get sick, or it's almost always going to be varroa that's the first problem. This year, let's increase your sampling efforts. Don't put up with weenie queens, and keep going to meetings and field days. There's always something else to learn. So we'll talk about all of these. This picture is what I call the glory days. It's in spring. We have frames full of honey, frames of gorgeous brood, and it's so easy to feel really good about your beekeeping. But then September rolls around, and things start to fall apart. Your bees look bad, the forage is all dried up, bees are robbing. Nobody's smiling anymore in September. And so these kind of changes happen, and it's just important to be aware. There's a lot of different pressures on bees. Here, you know all of these. These are, if you read any books, go to any meetings, these things are repeated over and over again. So many of these problems. And a lot of them, some of them we can't really do a lot about. Pesticides, genetics, viruses, we can't do a lot about, but we can work on varroa. We can try to work on queen issues sometimes. Starvation for sure. So some of this is on us. And we just need to do the very best we can. And we need to remember that you are their keeper. So you have to be the one to pay attention to these pressures and help your bees. You may think that your bees have been around for thousands of years and they can take care of themselves, which for the most part is true, but these days we have landscape changes. We have less forage than we have ever had before. We have problems that we haven't had in the past. Varroa is introduced. It's only been here since the 80s. So lots of different things that have changed the reason why we need to help our bees thrive. Okay, so let's talk about what you can do. You can provide your bees with a healthy environment for the most part, your immediate surroundings. You don't have a lot of control outside, but you can advocate for bees. You can tell your neighbors and so on. But you can plant flowers. We were just lucky here to have this in our research farm. We were able to use a plot of land and just plant a whole bunch of flowers. And so this is a really nice planting. We have borage, phacelia, and then this is a big mix. Here's some sunflowers. The important thing here is it's a diversity. So we have a lot of different kinds of pollens. So some pollens have this makeup of amino acids, and this kind of pollen has a different one. And so that diversity can complete the needs for the bees. So so we have the landscape directly into the colony here. It's represented with all those different colors. And that's all that complementary nutrition for your bees. So that's the protein. The protein is what builds bees. It's what the bees feed on, and inside their head, they're producing brood food for bees. So pollen is extremely important for protein. In a colony like this, full of pollen, all nicely packed, made into bee bread, this is a great frame of pollen. If you don't see this, supplement with protein patties. You can either buy them or make them. And then honey is their carbohydrate source, of course. So your bees need a lot of honey for winter, but they also need it especially in spring. Spring is probably even harder than winter because it's getting warmer and the bees can't get outside. They're getting warmer, they're growing, they're eating more, and then they can starve if they run out. So be very careful in spring. If you don't have enough honey, or if they're running low, white granulated sugar is sucrose. So is nectar. Nectar in different flowers also have other glucose, fructose makeup, but for the most part it's sucrose. So really, white granulated sugar is the next best thing because in its pure form it's sucrose, which is very simple for bees. If you try to use anything like brown sugar, even sometimes organic sugar has some additives, not additives, but but it's there's other components like the molasses in brown sugar that can cause bees a little bit of indigestion. So white granulated sugar is the next best thing. This time of year, because it's cold and your bees can't quite process the liquid sugar, try making those candy boards or bricks. And I have a video of how to make those. It's really easy. You don't even have to cook it, but you can just lay those bricks right on top of your bees on the frames, and that's some great emergency feed. Okay? This can't be underestimated. This was one of my hives. All these are bee butts. And there's no honey in the corners. What this is starvation. So you can see where the cap brood had extended. This was a big colony. So this frame had a large brood nest. But it was so big, it needed so much food, and I wasn't there in time to feed it when it was low, and they starved. And here's another picture. It's the most heartbreaking thing to open a colony and see this and know that I could have prevented it. So don't hesitate to put those bricks on your colonies if you feel like they're getting low. And you can heft the back of the colony, get a feel for how heavy your colony is getting or how light it's getting now, and be sure and stay on top of it. Because this was a huge colony, so this is a real heartbreaker. So now it's time to obsess. We're going to obsess this year over weather forecasts. If you see something like this, a whole straight week of rain, but it's in the 50s and 60s, it's nice and warm, the queen is producing, the bees are warming up and active in there, and they're eating, and they can't get outside. They can't, even if they could get outside, there's not a lot flowering, but if it's raining, they won't go outside. So they're just gonna eat everything. Spring, February and March, those are your most vulnerable times for your bees and starvation. So be extra careful with this. Okay, so we're gonna obsess over weather forecasts and we're gonna obsess over plants. This is maple, big leaf maple, and this is in our area, this is a really great nectar source in early spring. Probably here too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just noticed on our drive, we saw hazelnut trees with the little dangly things, and that's a great source of pollen. They don't produce a lot of nectar because they're not an insect pollinated plant, but bees will collect the pollen from hazelnut trees. So pay attention to that kind of stuff, and consider recording that in your journals when, like the dates when you start to see this flower blooming, because things change, but also when you notice this, it's time to get your honey supers on. It's time to get things dialed, your mite treatment in, your honey supers planned out, and it's go time. So obsess over plants. It's not just about bees. And now we're going to obsess over brood. So this is when we're going to start really talking about diseases. know the difference between healthy brood and unhealthy brood. And this is when you just need to slow down and take a good look at your frames and just pay attention to anything that you think might be slightly abnormal. So we want to see puddles of brood food. Those larvae, they need to be swimming in brood food in those cells. Glistening, puffy, white larvae, a good solid brood pattern. So that means you have a big queen, you have resources, they're doing well. Probably not a disease if you have a good solid brood pattern. We don't want to see twisted larvae, brown, perforated sunken cappings. I'll show you pictures of all of this. But first, healthy. This is what I mean by luscious, glistening, beautiful, C-shaped larvae. There's nothing twisted, nothing brown. They have ample food. Okay? Here's a real close-up of these pictures were taken by Alex Wild. He's an amazing entomology photographer. So if you check out his website, it's incredible. But these pictures are gorgeous. These are very well-fed larvae. And it's easy to see because this is nice yellow new wax, but even if you have older wax, you can see that kind of milky white substance. And these are very young larvae that just have ample food so they can grow and develop. But when you start seeing anything melty, like this center one here, it's just kind of lost those segments. It's just kind of turning into a glob. Or we have kind of a crunchy one. It's turning into a U shape and just kind of drying out. So anything that's just a little bit off, that's when it's time to really dive in and take a look. And also when you kind of like look back at the whole picture, it's a really spotty brood pattern. So this is garbage. We want to make sure that we're going to stop what we're doing and find out why this is happening. Here's a spotty brood pattern too. This is a red flag. You want to know why this is happening. Don't just breeze on by. This is dry brood. So these larvae here, it's very hard to see. I think, yeah, here I have pictures that are, you can see there's nothing in the cells. So these larvae, a nurse bee might come along and feed it a little bit, but it's all about time. They have such a short amount of time for development. If there's any period of time where they're not receiving food, that could affect their development. So we could have an adult come out of these larvae here, but they're compromised. And so you're producing compromised bees. So it's really important if you see something like this, get that sugar syrup on, get the protein patties in, do whatever you can. Just like put as much input as you can to help your bees. And become an expert at detecting abnormal brood. So anything you see is really, that's the time to stop. I think it's hard to do sometimes because you want to get the job done. You maybe have a lot of hives, you don't have a lot of time, but just slow it down. If you have a frame, shake the bees off. You can even put the lid back on your colony, but it's important for you to take the time and learn, as well as just identifying the problem. Maybe bring a buddy with you that has more experience and take a really close look at this brood. Okay, if you see this, get out your diagnostic kit. I have one here. We made these little kits, and it's kind of nice because you can, if you keep your little emergency bag in your bee stuff, you don't have to run back into the house and find all this stuff. So we have a little sample jar in case we need to send some bees back to the lab. Gloves, toothpicks for the AFB ropey test, forceps or tweezers, and then we also have these kits that we use for AFB or EFB. And these are really great to have like for a bee club because they expire and they're also $15 and they're a one-time use. So it doesn't make sense for everybody to have one because you might not ever see AFB, hopefully, or you might see EFB once or twice. So this is a great thing to share. But anyway, having this kind of kit in with your stuff is really important. Flashlight to get light is so important for diagnosing any kind of diseases. Really need to see inside those cells and all around the cells. A record book and your mite monitoring kit. So has anyone used one of these, a Varroa Easy Check? We love these so much. They're $20. They're so easy. You can use this for the alcohol method or the powdered sugar shake. So you put the bees, I just use this as the scoop. So shake your bees, scoop them up, put them in here. It should either be pre-filled with alcohol or powdered sugar. If you do the powdered sugar shake, you just invert this and then you can shake it out. It's really cool. Anyway, having this and constantly using it will really help you with your Varroa levels because you have to know. Okay? Okay, let's get into diseases. So the big ones that I'll talk about: European foul brood, chalk brood, sac brood, and American foul brood. Okay, first, we're going to look at a little progression of a frame. So here we have larvae that are white and puffy and C-shaped. So this is looking okay. This looks a little suspicious, right? Just a tiny bit. It probably would be easy to go past this by. On the same frame. Now we're going down the way, and suddenly we see like a deflated larva. Something's very clearly wrong. This one's losing a little bit of its segments, and now we see down here, we see some brown, twisted, really gnarly looking larvae. So we get our diagnostic kit out because this is a red flag. Could this be AFB, EFB, or what? This is EFB. So European foul brood affects mostly the open larvae, the open larval stage. So like these larvae here, they're all open. They're not pupated yet, and they usually are older. But you can tell they're just like melting, turning this brown toffee-ish color, and sometimes they have this twist. And I don't know, I guess that one has more of a twist. I think I have a better picture. But this larva here, this has that twist, but it also has that tracheal system. So here you can see these white lines. That's the tracheal system of the larva, and for some reason with EFB, the tracheal system persists. And it's a clue for us because now we can see, oh, this is EFB. So you see this, but not all the time. Sometimes they're just melty globs. It's just like molten larvae here. And so you can't really count on a lot of these symptoms to be cut and dry. But what we can count on is it's the open larval stage. If you use your toothpick and try to stir this up and get the Ropey test, have you guys heard of that for AFB? If you can pull out the contents of a stirred up cell, we can show you when we pull out the frames, it'll stretch. If it's AFB, American foul brood, it'll stretch out like snot. I have some pictures for you.
Okay.
But EFB doesn't do that. So get your toothpicks out, try the Ropey test, and go crazy with your toothpicks. This is a perfect little twist shape. These pictures were taken by Ellen. And she did some really nice photography for us here. Really nice, twisted, very classic symptom for European foul brood. Okay, so this mostly happens in the spring. Usually it goes away with a good solid nectar flow, nutrition. It's a stress disease, so if there's nutritional stress or some other kind of stressor, European foul brood can really take over. But it seems like it's persisting longer. It feels like we're seeing it even after a good solid nectar flow or during. So things might be changing. So there are a lot of studies now in European foul brood. How is it related to blueberry pollination? How is it related to springtime making nukes, changing up the colony? There's lots of different factors, and so lots of research is being poured into it, which is a really great thing. So we can get some answers. But if you have it, if you have EFB, you can do these tests too that I showed you. That's another good way to get a positive or negative. Usually you don't need to treat your colony. Usually it'll pull itself out. Sometimes I like to just take an infected frame and pull the frame, and I would either just throw it away or punch out the comb and let them draw a new comb. because it's the disease of the brood. And if you get rid of the brood, then you're kind of like breaking that cycle. That has worked for me before, but it doesn't always. You can't always count on it. So that's kind of the thing with all of these. Terramycin is an antibiotic, and it is registered for EFB. It is effective, but it's kind of a decision to make. Do you want to use that in your colony? If you don't, try requeening to break that brood cycle as well. Remove those affected brood frames. Provide optimal nutrition. So get rid of all of the stressors, syrup, protein, and shook swarms. This is an option you can do. So this picture right here demonstrates a shook swarm. We have on the right, on the left, there's a disease colony, and you just shake all of the adults into the box on the right. On the right. Of brand new frames. So brand new equipment. And you're just putting the adults in and the queen and taking out all of the brood. So that is 3 times less likely to test positive for EFB later than if you use antibiotics. So it can work. I think it's a great option. You're dialing back your colony in a big way because you're losing all that brood. But I think it's kind of worth it. I'd rather take that than try to do the antibiotics. But that's just me, and you make that decision, but this is, it's a good option. Yeah?
Are those frames of foundation, or do they have comb?
They're frames of foundation, in this case. If you think you have good comb, though, that is not diseased, if you can be confident about that, I don't see why that wouldn't work. So yeah. But if it is diseased, I would get rid of it altogether. So EFB isn't like AFB where the spores, EFB doesn't have spores, but you don't have to worry so much about it being as persistent for decades like you do with AFB. So I would get rid of them though. At least that comb, and then do some things with the frames, like put some new foundation in. Okay, so American foul brood now. This is the one that has the spores. So if you think of a spore like a seed of a bacteria, there's the spore stage, which is like the seed, and then it grows, and that's the germination stage. The germination stage is what causes the symptoms. So here's that ropey test with the toothpick pulling that really gross larva contents out. So if you treat this disease with antibiotics, you're getting rid of that germination stage of the bacteria, and the symptoms can disappear. But that seed stage, that spore stage, is going to stick around. It's very persistent, and it'll stick around for up to 90 years. So AFB is very persistent and very serious, but it's also rare. So some of the symptoms are a foul odor. We brought some today. I never know whether to bring them out, but it's totally safe. There are no bees here, and you guys won't carry it with you. It's totally fine. But if you want to see it and smell it, I like to show people AFB frames because once you smell it, you never forget it. And it's an important smell to have locked in your memory, because then if you smell it again, you know right away what it is. It's not really a decaying odor, because EFB doesn't smell unless it has a secondary infection of some bacteria, but there's also just simply dead bee decaying smell, which you will smell in your life as a beekeeper, but there's just a really bad bacterial foul odor. So we'll smell them. Sweaty cappings, I have a better picture in a second. Sunken perforated cells, the ropey test. Pupal tongue is you'll see that in books a lot, but it's actually kind of rare to see that in real life. And the scale, that's my favorite symptom. We're gonna look at pictures. Okay, so these are the sweaty cappings. It's just oozing something, sweat, moisture, and nothing else does that. And so AFB affects the capped stage for the most part. You can see that there's some open here as well. but the capped larvae are the most affected for American foul brood. Here we can see the melted, molten larvae, and if you took the toothpick, it would stretch out like snot or taffy, or just, it will rope out like a couple centimeters. And then if you look really closely, you can see a little bit of material at the bottom. That's a scale, and you can barely see it, but this doesn't have it. This does not. So you see the difference? That is a petrified larva that has died and sunk into the bottom, and it's just like dead, and it's really difficult to remove. If this were EFB, you could take your forceps and pull it out. But AFB, it's like locked in there. So that's a good symptom to know if it's AFB, American foul brood. Okay, here's a video. And I love this one because this is a frame. It actually doesn't look that bad, right? It's not sweating. It's not like really gory. It's just kind of a spotty brood pattern, of course. And we can see some perforated cells, but I don't know. I don't really see a lot of sunken cappings. If I looked at this really quickly, I would just think there's something wrong. Maybe I'd take a closer look, and I would have missed a really important disease. So, okay. I'm pressing play. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to tilt it into the sun and take a look at the cells. Okay, now the bottom of the cells, can you see where the scales are?
Yeah.
Okay, so here, this is empty, scale.
It looks like it's kind of on the wall.
Yes, but I'm holding it by the ears of the frame and tilting it forward. So what you're seeing is the bottom of the cell. So I'll do it one more time. But it's just amazing to me that you would never see it this way. Looking straight on, it looks just empty. And so that's why light is so important, using really good light and different angles. So look in the bottom of your cell to see if there are any scales.
At the bottom as it sits in the hive.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and we can take a look at some real frames. But this just demonstrates how we can easily be fooled. One time a woman came to me and she said, I bought a bunch of frames, and we all know we're not supposed to buy used equipment, but she knew the guy, and she just wanted to have it checked out. So I'm going through and everything looked blank, like a blank frame of nothing. But then I stepped into the sun and I did that little, just held it at the right angle, and it was full of scale. She just bought a whole load of AFB. And if she put bees onto it, they would have all died, and they would have spread to other apiaries, and it would have been a big mess. So she was out a bunch of money, and a little bit of heartbreak too, because she thought she was getting all this equipment. So anyway, just be extra vigilant. This is rare, but it is here. So I've seen this in practically all regions of Oregon, but maybe once or twice per region. So it's not that common, but it is very serious. Okay, that's just another picture of the same thing. Okay, your bees, if they're in an infected colony, you may still have nurse bees that are trying to clean things out. One scale has 2 billion spores. And I have a thing on here. It only takes like 10 spores to set off an infection, some kind of incredibly low number like that. So it is very serious. You don't want this spreading. So be careful with your hive. If you do see AFB, be careful with your hive tools. Be careful changing frames around and so on. Okay, these kits are great. Get one for AFB, one for EFB, and it's just like a COVID test. You put a couple of larvae in the little jar, the little plastic thing, and you shake it up, and then you get this, the lines. And you can barely see the lines in this test here, but they're there. And it doesn't mean that if you have a strong line, it doesn't mean you have a lot of it. And a weak line doesn't mean you don't have a lot of it. It's either positive or negative. So I have found them to be pretty effective. They're not 100% effective, but I think that they're pretty reliable, especially if you can back it up with the symptoms that you see. Okay, so it's AFB. Now what? I suggest you burn your hive because it's 100% effective. It's heartbreaking to do it, especially if you have bees in there, but it's really the only way to get it out of your life. Otherwise, if you use antibiotics, you have a lot of other things to think about. So let's start with terramycin. There's a lot of resistance these days in terramycin, so it's not recommended to use this product for AFB. It only kills the vegetative stage, which we talked about. The symptoms will disappear, so you won't see the ropey test or the spotty brood pattern, sweaty cappings, smell. That'll all be gone, but those spores will still stick around. So those seeds, they'll just stay in the frames forever. And so that means that you have to use the treatment, the antibiotics, forever. Because the minute you stop, the spores will germinate. So you have to commit to constantly, or every year, using terramycin. So you have to ask yourself if you want to commit to that, or if you just want to start over. Thailand is another one that you can use. Both of them are really do not want to use this around any time of honey production, because you don't want it in the honey for humans. You need a VFD, so you have to go to a veterinarian. You have to know a veterinarian, establish a relationship, and then get the VFD. It's like a little form in order to get the product. So lots of steps, but that's because we have a lot of antibiotics in the environment and in circulation, and we need to dial it back a little bit to make sure they stay effective. Because we lost this, we lost terramycin, and so now we have Thailand. Thailand persists even longer, so it's kind of a tricky situation. That's why I always recommend just to burn it and get it out of your life. If you can't burn it, if there's like a fire restriction or something, you can use those heavy-duty contractor bags and double bag them, and you can put them in the landfill. It's the transmission risk is pretty low if you do that, if you double up and throw them out. What you don't want to do is just leave them in your yard, or anywhere where bees can rob out the contents, the honey, anything else. Okay, so chalk brood is the next one. Have you guys seen chalk brood? It's very common. Okay, so it's a fungus, and it's when the larvae turn into little hunks of chalk. It looks like chalk. So it's a fungus, and that's the mushroom stage. What's the word? Mycelium stage of the fungus. And what happens? So they turn in. It just kind of like envelops the larva like that, and then the bees will kick it out. And you may have seen this before, where they kick out the mummies on the porch or on the bottom board. Okay, this is the fungus name. Chalk brood loves weak colonies, high humidity, excessive moisture, cooler temperatures, wet, cool weather. It loves Oregon, Western Oregon. So we see it a lot. And usually it clears up by itself, but not always. So what you can do is make sure you have really well-ventilated colonies. There are all the mummies on the bottom board. And you can tell it's not like they're not cleaning out pollen. Sometimes you can see the little pellets of pollen that they're cleaning out. But you can see these are segmented. So you know that those are larval, those are mummies there. Okay, consider requeening. Sometimes it's just the genetics of the queen that is making them susceptible to chalk brood. There was a study in Canada where they requeened. They had some queens from one source, some queens from another source, and one had an outbreak, the other didn't. So it could be genetics. If you requeen, you're also doing a brood break with that introductory period, especially if you can delay that by maybe leaving the queen in the cage for a little bit longer. You're creating a brood break. You can do a lot with a brood break, actually. You're breaking the cycle for any kind of brood diseases, like chalk brood or EFB. But you can also create a brood break, if you do it long enough, to where the varroa mites are phoretic and not in the brood, and then you can treat. We'll talk about more varroa in a second. Apigard is a Varroa treatment that also has on the label that it can act against shockbrood. Be really careful about transferring shockbrood frames from one colony to another. Okay, now we have Varroa. Do you guys need to do a stretch or anything? Okay. So this is our most common scenario right here. A spotty brood pattern, a bunch of uncapped larvae, and up here we have headless pupae. So the bees have chewed off the heads, and they're trying to extract these pupae here to get rid of what's in there, which is Varroa mites. Okay, so spotty brood pattern, and what else? Just some remnants, and a lot of really gross looking larvae. Here's some more. A lot of it actually can look very similar to EFB. There's kind of that twisted larva there, and up here as well, spotty brood pattern for sure. You can see that bee has deformed wings, so it has deformed wing virus. So this is an extreme case of parasitic mite syndrome. And this is what we most commonly see. Out of everything that I've shown you so far, this is our most common problem, the biggest problem. So the Varroa mite is a really large parasite compared to the size of the bee. So in 2021, I did the colony autopsy clinic because I had had so many phone calls of people wanting me to figure out what happened, why did their bees die? And so I just had appointments. It was peak COVID, so we had to get all the appointments and hand sanitizer, all that. And people would bring me their bees, and we would go through it together, pick through it, and figure out what happened. And everyone would say, I don't have mites. I did not see any mites. Stop looking for mites. You're not going to see them. And here's why. Their favorite place to nestle into a bee is on the underside. And when you're looking at a frame, you're looking at their backs. So you're not seeing them on their bellies. You're also not seeing them because they're in the brood. They're breeding in the brood. So you're not seeing the mites, but you do have mites. The only way to really know is to sample. And this Honeybee Health Coalition has lots of different ways on how to sample videos, lots of different treatments. So we're not going to talk about all the treatments today, but this is a really great resource. It has all the pros and cons. What temperature this one is best at, this time of year use this, and blah, blah, blah. There's so much to know. So go to that. And always sample after treatment. So everyone samples before, which is great, so you know what you're working with. But you also need to know that your treatment was enough. Sometimes if you have a really heavy infestation and you've treated enough. Well, you've treated some, but maybe it's not enough to get it low enough to where the bees will survive the winter. Or maybe your treatment wasn't effective at all. Or maybe there was a temperature issue. Maybe it was too hot and all the bees are bearding out and not getting access to the treatment. Blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of different reasons the treatment might not work, but you would never know if you don't sample after treatment. So this is probably one of the most important times to sample. To me, I know I have mites at all these certain periods of time in the year, and I don't even sample anymore. I know when I need to do it, but I do sample after the treatment so I know if it worked or not. I can't tell you how many times treatment hasn't worked, and I've had to go back. And if you're too late, it's over. So it's so important to know. Okay, so it's 2023. We're going to do our very best. So do your very best to control Varroa, and that will help you be a successful beekeeper. There's no silver bullet. That's why that guide is really important, so you can figure out which one works the best for you at what point in time. Monitor to know your level of mites, and integrate controls to keep the level at 1 to 2%. And always sample after treatment. And don't let up. You can't relax. The mites will take over. It's like they know. So you have to really be absolutely firm and don't go on vacation unless you know your hives are taken care of. Otherwise, you'll come back from vacation and you won't have bees. Or they might be okay and you think that they're a big roaring colony in September, but then they're dead in January. That happens so much. People always say, my colony was huge, I don't know what happened. But it was because the varroa wasn't, it wasn't enough. The treatment wasn't enough, or people didn't treat at all. Okay? Okay, next thing, don't put up with weenie queens. Queens, these are my favorite pictures to take. I love taking pictures of workers in the honeybee lab with these beautiful frames of brood. Sometimes queen problems can be detected with spotty brood patterns or just like low population or something, but it's also, I don't want you to blame everything on the queen. So make sure that everything, you've looked for the brood diseases, you've looked for varroa mites, and you have all these checked off. Queens these days last for maybe 1 to 2 years. Look at that. Isn't that incredible? But also look at the corners. No honey. So these are all going to hatch out probably within a week, and they're not going to have anything to eat. So this is kind of dangerous right here. Amazing brood. Look at that one. I get really excited. So 2023, you're going to commit. Maintain strong colonies. Know what's healthy, know what's not. Get a buddy. Look at things together. Sharpen those observational skills. Really hone them. Keep good queens. Regularly requeen. Offer proper nutrition. Keep good records. And constant vigilance and monitoring is the key. And you are their keeper, so this is your year to be the absolute very best beekeeper you can be. So really pour into your bees this year. And hopefully the glory days can be extended well into the year. It's always going to be bad in September, but you can make it a little bit better. Okay, so that's what I got. Thank you. This is our Instagram, and sometimes we post a lot of educational pictures, and like we'll find diseases to show you, or sometimes we'll just be goofy. So check that out if you can. And I can answer some questions, but then we can also go through the frames and pick at things. So does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So sampling after treatment. If you sample immediately after you treat, you might get an impression that the treatment worked because you have low percent infestation on your bees, because the phoretic mites, the ones on the bees, are been knocked down. But then shouldn't you wait a little bit, like a week or 2 after treatment? Because then more bees will hatch, and that's where the mites are under the cap.
That's a really good point. So in general, your general rule of thumb is to sample 2 weeks after your treatment, and that will get exactly what you're talking about. The bees will hatch out, and we'll see what kind of mites were under the cappings. So Formic Pro and Mite Away Quick Strips, they claim to kill the mites under the cappings. We're going to try that out this year. We're going to see if they actually do. So we're going to open the cells, and we're going to see if the mites are dead or not. I like to think that they are, and that the treatment does work all the way through and kills those mites under the cappings. But who knows? So that's why sampling 2 weeks after treatment is the best. Yeah.
How often do you recommend recruiting? Is it every 2 years? I mean, you have a good queen, she's doing fine and everything, and by the 3rd year, you're not seeing the ratio of production.
Yeah.
So do you do it every other year, every year? What's the norm nowadays?
If you're a commercial beekeeper, you would do it every year.
Yes.
My personal colonies, I would probably do it every other year, unless I saw a problem. So if I see, you can buy a queen that peters out. Maybe the weather was bad when she was mating, and she does a great job the first couple months, and then just like all of a sudden there's a bunch of drones. That can happen. So I think it's case by case. But in general, I would say maybe every other year if you're not a commercial beekeeper We requeen just about every year because we have trials and stuff that we need them to be top-notch queens for the whole season. So we do it every year. But for my personal bees, I don't think I wouldn't. I think that's a lot. But it seems like they're lasting like a shorter and shorter amount of time.
Right. And then this is sort of a side question. If you're trying to raise your own queens and you're only doing about 6 queens, every time you do it,
Mm-hmm.
And you get a good nuke going, and then they go over to the next year, do you requeen them the year after that? Or do you watch, and if they aren't doing well, just get rid of that queen and replace her that year that she's doing the nuke?
I think I would take it on a case by case basis. I would like just look really. Is she doing really well? Is it productive? Is she making a lot of brood? And if not, if it's just kind of stagnating, then it's time for a new queen. And there's so many factors that could make her either great or not so great. Especially raising them in Oregon is hard because of mating weather.
Right.
And so a lot can go wrong. So I think it's just important to keep a close eye. I don't have a cut and dry answer for that. Yeah.
Do you requeen by letting your bees raise new queens themselves, or do you buy queens? And if you do, where do you buy queens?
Okay. You can make a queen. You can make a queen just by leaving eggs in a colony and having them raise their own, and that's great. But it takes a long time. So it has to raise the larva and the cell, and then it hatches. It takes time to kind of like develop enough where it can fly out. Then it flies, mates, comes back. This can set you back about 4 weeks. If you buy a queen, it's ready to go. It has an introductory period, but the timing is so much shorter. It's going to mate. It's a much more reliable way. But if you have the time and if you have the resources, and I think you could do that. Sometimes what I like to do is if it's swarm season, I'll take swarm cells out like with the frame and put them in a nuke and let them raise a queen that way. And I kind of like that because those queens are destined as queens from the very beginning, whereas queens in emergency situations, you might get a queen that was made from a larva that's very old, and it wasn't fed the royal jelly from the very get-go. And that could have, that nutritional difference could impact your queen quality. But a swarm cell, that's destined to be a queen from the very beginning, so that queen is fed everything she can be fed right from the beginning. Some people say that you're perpetuating the genetic disposition to swarm, and I don't know. I guess you have to kind of weigh what's important to you. If you're really good at keeping swarming under control, then go for it. But okay, so we buy queens at OSU. We buy them from a producer. Her name is Jackie Park Burris. She produces sister queens for us, which means the mom is the same and the dads are different. So the genetic makeup of the queens are a tiny bit similar, as similar as they possibly can be in an open mated system. And we want that in our studies because that is just a little bit of variation that we're removing from our trials. So she does that for us, and it's special. She has to keep track of who the mom is and so on. So that's a really nice thing that she does for us. And that's why we go with her. But there's some great producers out there. Heikams, Oliveris, Ellen is the queen of queens. So can you help us out with some more sources?
So, are you specific to California?
No, just okay. There's a couple in Oregon. John Jacob, the Old Soul apiaries. Thad Starr. in Creswell or somewhere around Eugene.
Pleasant Hill.
Pleasant Hill, thank you. I think those are the only two in Oregon that are like commercially available. Where do you guys get bee supplies? Do you have a shop here?
Man Lake.
Man Lake? Okay.
Man Lake just bought Shastina Mills,
Oh,
White City, Oregon,
okay.
and they are an excellent source of equipment.
Okay.
They're a lot cheaper than Lori Bee.
Okay.
Yeah, and they have the factory right there in White City. You know, beekeeping supplies for nationwide distributors made in White City.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, Shastina Mill Works.
Okay. Okay. So that's a great place to buy your equipment. If you're as a club, if you guys need queens, I think it would be worthwhile to buy them together and get them all shipped at once. You can save a bunch of money that way, and sometimes you can get a discount. Yeah.
Where do you get your American Valve test kits?
We get those. Well, we buy them directly from the company because we buy a lot of them, and they discount them. So you can buy them from Man Lake, or Data,
Okay, just
but
online.
they're like $15. I have a. Oh yeah, I brought a test kit, and I think we'll just leave it with the club. So in here, there are 2 kits. There's one for AFB and EFB. The EFB, so they expire. This one expires in November. This one expired in November of 2022, but we use them all the time, and I think they're fine. Sample jars. So I think if you need any of this, just contact the club, and also maybe have a craft night. Make a bunch of these because they're so great to have. All of your stuff put together, and so it's just a really great way to get in there and dig into your brains and look for diseases. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
So speaking of Formic Pro treatments overall, do you treat with 2 strips or 1?
I used to. So I'm pretty heavy-handed. I don't have the patience. Unless there's a big heat wave, then I'll use 1. Or if it's a smaller colony, or sometimes I'll use 1. But for the most part, I really like Formic Pro. I think it's very effective. It is strong though, and it'll wipe out your brood. But I think that's a small price to pay for the efficacy of it. I think it works really well. So
It's a little scary when you first do 2 strips and 300 bees or whatever, 1,000 bees drop dead.
it is, yeah.
The next morning you're just like,
That's true. Yeah, yeah. So I think 1 can work well too, as long as you're like really careful to put the next one in at the right time, and sample just to make sure. If it didn't work, you got to do it again. So yeah, I think it's personal preference. I just do it. I think the ones that die are probably the ones that are older, and 300 bees. So you lose probably at least 1,000 bees a day anyway. And so it's not that many. And so that's what I tell that to people that have a little bit of a hesitation to kill 300 bees for the sampling. You lose so many bees a day just naturally. But doing this and knowing your varroa levels can save your whole colony. So it's important to sacrifice some of them to save all the rest.
Does the powdered sugar method kill the bees too?
Well, the jury's out for that one. You have to be pretty aggressive with the shaking, and I have seen some pretty roughed up. So when you dump them back onto the top bars, there's some that are just kind of, I'm not sure they're going to make it. We've talked about this. The only way to tell is we'd have to mark them. Maybe we'll do this someday. Mark all the bees.
But some will live.
Some will live. Yeah, and you can see the ones that are a little
Alcohol kills the whole apricot, apricot, or whatever.
right.
They're all gone.
Quickly. You just shake them and
You don't have to shake, just
damage them,
swizzle
and then
them a
they'll
little bit.
die slowly, painfully.
Yeah, but it's worth it. Yeah.
Talk a little about using the screen bottom board for, trying to monitor the population.
Yeah, the screen bottom board, it's a good way to look at a trend, but you're not getting hard answers. You're not getting a percentage. So your screen bot, you could have a double deep colony that's roaring, and you could have a weakling over here, 2 screen bottom boards, and they both have 25 mites. So the big one might not be that much, but well, 25 is still a lot, but the little one, if you have 25 mites, that's almost dead. So you don't know the population, excuse me, and that's why knowing that you have 300 bees, 25 mites per 300 bees, you know your level. But if you do it time after time, and like suppose you have one or 2 hives and you're constantly keeping track, you can notice trends. I think they're kind of neat for putting under when you're treating, because then they all they rain down and you can get a big load of them, and it's very satisfying. So that's great for screen bottom boards, but I wouldn't rely on them for a good solid answer of how many mites you have. Okay, let's, one more.
You mentioned something about being able to keep 2 queens in a box.
Oh yeah, so
How you lock them in there or what?
you keep them in cages, and they're racked up, and you can keep, so Ellen has projects where she has 30 in one rack and 60 in another rack. So you keep them all locked in there, so there's no way that the bees can chew or release the queen. They can feed her through the screen, and having them all caged will not make them kill any of the queens. If you have a loose queen running around a queen bank with them all in there, you can lose all of those queens. But so you have to be really careful. Anyway, so Ellen should talk queen banks sometime.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great way to have queens available. Like if you can overwinter a queen bank, you could have queens anytime to fix a problem or make a nuke in spring when queens aren't available. So she's doing great work, and it's really exciting to have that as an option. Okay, so let's dive in. So what we'll do is let's split up the group so we have half here and half here.